we take a moment and do something that will contradict it. We exercise to get out our angers and frustrations, or drown our sorrows in chocolate, whatever our choice may be. This week's reading sounds really harsh. It's very hard, but it goes hand in hand with the gospel reading of 2 weeks ago and the one that you didn't hear last week. They're all the Sermon on the Mount. So 2 weeks ago, we heard the congratulations. And last week's reading was, you are the salt of the earth. You're the city of the hill. You are the light of the world. And this week's reading is the law. The law says this, you've heard this, but all these things are still the Sermon on the Mount. So in our time and context, Jesus has been talking for 3 weeks, seated in the same place with the same listeners. We are still seated at Jesus' feet, listening in on what he's saying to his disciples. So, what we miss then, of all things, Jesus starts talking about salt. Not just salt, but he speaks of salt losing its flavor. Well, let me tell you why you are here. You are to be the salt seasoning that brings out God's flavors on this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. That's the Message's translation of Matthew from last week's reading. But salt doesn't lose its flavor. Common salt comprises of a very stable and simple chemical compound called sodium chloride, which we all know helps ice go away. And it has a salty flavor. Table salt typically also contains a minor amount of additives to keep it free-flowing so it doesn't become one big solid rock again. But it doesn't lose its saltiness. You can store it forever, and it still is salty. Historically, salt has been obtained from crude sources such as salt marshes and minerals such as rock salt. They contain stable sodium chloride plus other components. It's water soluble. If salt were exposed to condensation or rain, water, the sodium chloride would just dissolve and be removed. And the salt could in fact lose its saltiness that way. You know, if you make something too salty, you add a little bit more liquid to it and it thins it out a bit. In summary, salt is very stable and keeps its properties. So salt, more or less. To each of us, it tastes a bit different. Some need more salt, some need less salt to enhance the flavor of their food, but salt cannot lose its flavor. One commenter says, what I also found interesting is that salt did, in the religious tradition of Jesus' day, become unclean and was to be thrown away. When it was ritually pure, it was used in the temple to season the incense, and it was even added to the offerings. So salt was a big deal in the life of Israel and in the life of the emerging societies of that time, depended upon it as a preservative as well. The basic image, nevertheless, is a powerful one. Salt without its saltiness really isn't any good at all. I found that reading moving me in a bit of a different interpretation. In cooking, we need a certain amount of salt for flavor, of course, and our bodies need salt, but a regulated amount. Too much or too little, and well, we know this result can be high blood pressure, etc. So I'm wondering if we would be so off track to say that we need to keep a healthy balance of salt. If we need a healthy balance of salt, what is Jesus saying about spiritual life? We need a healthy balance in our spiritual life as well, out in the world, so that we can be the salt of godliness that this world needs. Jesus evokes the utility of salt, but also limits its usefulness. Salt that has lost its salty essence is no longer salt. It was no longer fit for its previous uses. It's to be tossed into the path and be walked upon. Now, after the Sermon on the Mount is not a reflection on cooking ingredients, but on the shape of God's high calling upon our lives. How is righteousness like salt exactly? Or who or what exactly is that salt that has lost its saltiness? Well, Jesus gives a very practical understanding about light and how people go around wasting perfectly good and expensive candles was light. That's the next thing he says, for you are the light of the world, but it was under a bushel. Now, candles are mostly associated with worship, and Jesus may be more speaking about a lamp, oil lamps, butter lamps, something that was more likely relevant to the people's ears. But I always had this image, if you've ever seen an oil lamp, if you put it under what we would call a bushel, which is usually made out of wood or straw, actually that light's going to get a lot brighter fast and burn down your house. Again, moderation. Not too much light, not too little light. And today we often think of the city on the hill, all alight, much like our big cities, where the glare is so strong one cannot even see the sky. But Jesus' image, that his hearers would understand, would have been a night dark as could be, lit by stars or moon. And while one is still far away, a gentle, inviting glow from the city. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, when he talks about salt and light and being on a hill, in many ways it's the middle of the roadway. Jesus is saying we need to be gentle, loving expressions of God here on earth. We are called not to be overpowering. We're also called not to be silent. Nicholas King explains it this way: as Christians, we can get our mission wrong in two ways. Either we can see our task as lecturing the rest of the world on their errors, or we can think no one will listen and keep quiet to ourselves. These two images of salt and light offer a middle way. We still have to be gentle and merciful peacemakers. So the more arrogant of the two horns of the dilemma is excluded. But we have nevertheless the important function of adding bite or flavor and illumination to the world. So we can't retreat behind barricades into false humility. That does not mean the world will be impressed by us. However, so Jesus warns us to expect persecution. Not on the other hand, is there any sign here that Jesus is condemning the world? That's just the way it is. So those who think it's not respectful to laugh in church ought to look again at the joke about putting light under a bucket and also learn the lesson. We have no cause to be shy about the gospel message. Both of these images start to shape Jesus' expectation of us, that we not remain disciples, but become apostles. That we not simply follow Jesus, but we're meant to go out and be an example to others. We are changed lives by reflecting the life of Jesus. And sometimes, I think we get into trouble by trying to reflect other things. Jesus is saying, be salt as I am salt in the world. Be light as I am light in the world. Jesus is saying there are very good and faithful people. They live faithful and good lives. They work hard to be good, to color within the lines, if you will. They do what they feel is required of them and try to do as best they can. Can you hear the issue? Back in the 80s, there was a Christian rock band I really liked their music. And they had a song called My Room. I live in my room. It's warm here in my room. The world's spinning like a big top, but I've got a secret, and I slip it under the door to the wicked world. I read in my room. I memorize in my room. I am removing myself. I am moving quietly. Those without the secret keep knocking on my door, disturbance from the wicked world. Being a really good person, being a good spiritual person is well and good, but if it's all about you, focused on you, well, you're putting the light under the bushel, aren't you? And then, in the midst of this, Jesus suddenly shifts from light and salt and being a beacon for the world to the law. First he says, do not suppose for 1 minute that I have come to demolish the scriptures, either God's law or the prophets. I am here not to demolish the law, but to complete it. I'm going to put it all together for you in a nice little vast panorama. God's law is more real and lasting than the stars in the sky and the ground at your feet. Long after stars burn out and the earth wears out, God's law will be alive and working. Again, that's the message's interpretation. So today's reading, which becomes even heavier, people interpret these sayings of murder and anger and lust and divorce as new laws. But they're really expansions, and if you listen carefully, we can hear something. something pure and simple about God's law. Not man's interpretation of the law, but God's law. God's law goes further. God's law goes beyond don't do this and don't do that. God's law, the law of love, says we are called to go beyond. It may not be murder, but words. Where to go? It may not be murder, but words in anger or hate can eat away at our soul, just as killing someone can eat away at another person's soul. And to add to that, in this day and age, we know that words can kill. If you're holding a grudge or you know someone is mad at you, go and try to make amends or ask for forgiveness. Actually, that is all one can do. But then we have to stop and forgive ourselves. Often it's our own heart that holds us back from being fully present to God. One commentator puts it this way. So Jesus teaches it is insufficient to avoid murdering someone. Certain kinds of anger and insult can themselves be a form of violence to eschew. We might note how the power and privilege of some can affect death on our neighbors, whether intended or not. The prohibition of taking someone's life has always extended to include a prohibition against dealing in death in less explicit, but no less destructive ways. But then Jesus lists the stakes even more. Reconciliation is a prerequisite of coming before God at the altar. That is, what if broken relationships among neighbors, family, and friends are not just social obstacles among us, but a barometer of our relationship to God? What if the observance of murder is not just avoiding killing, but reparative reconciliation? That is, the command not to murder extends even beyond taking a life. The rejection of the deterioration of someone's character is essential in embodying the command not to murder. What he is saying here is that it is all about relationship. And not just among family and friends, but how do we interact with each other and another on a daily basis? Do we begin and continue to interact from the point of love, or do we diminish and insult and exclude? And then Jesus tackles divorce and adultery. But remember, in that day and age, and until most recently, men had all the power. Men had all the control. And even though this is the perspective that Jesus approaches his extension of the law, Jesus makes it the responsibility of the gazer, not the one who's gazed upon. Jesus makes it the responsibility of the person who's initiating the divorce, not the divorcee. It is not the woman who is guilty of being a temptress, but it's the man's responsibility not to objectify. I think that's the important thing. Again, what matters here is not behavior, but relationality. An objectifying gaze is an obstacle to authentic community, precisely because such a gaze treats the other not as a child of God, a bearer of God's image, but as a mere object. Thus, the call to avoid adultery is, to be sure, a way to extol the preservation of commitments we have made in romantic relationships, but also a commitment to the flourishing of all those other kin we meet in non-romantic contexts. We owe it to one another to treat and see our neighbors as if they are bearers of the image of God, for that indeed is who we all are. So in the end, Jesus is calling us to live into love. And this includes, but not limited to paying attention to the world around us, listening empathetically to people and how they are being treated and how we have treated or mistreated or not treated at all. Listening empathetically to people. Hashtag the Me Too movement. Hear the cry for justice in Black Lives Matter movement. Understand that no human being is illegal and that there is no planet B. We are called to go further. We're called to go beyond the law. That song that I mentioned earlier by Daniel Amos, the last verse says says this, I sleep in my room. It's dark now in my room. Meanwhile, time is ticking. It's raining outside, heaven's tears are falling down. Yet I am in my room. We are called to step out of our rooms. We're called to step out of our sanctuaries. We're called to step beyond the Ten Commandments. We're called to seek to be God's love in this world. When we live in love, we are light. We are salt. We are the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. When we live in love, we find the courage and the ability to go further. To go further in love. When we start to act out in love against the injustices of this world, whether it just be giving one person a sandwich. If we're acting authentically, we know the next day that that sandwich is not just enough. When we offer somebody a shirt because they need some clothing, we know that it's not just some body, but there are more behind it. As we practice into living beyond the law, we are called further up and further in. And our hearts are pulled in that direction as we spiritually grow into living in a just world. And we do that here. We seek ways to bring justice to the world, to serve those in need, to reach out to the other. And so I pray that we will continue to work to bring a just world for all in the name of God's love and the love of Christ, and to seek out different ways that we can be that image of Christ to our brothers and sisters. Amen. Please rise in the body of your spirit as you're able to join us.